Well, good morning, everyone. It is August the 16th, 2020, and we are here for another Adult Sunday School class from the Goldendale Church of the Nazarene. Last week, if you remember, we were talking about King David, the first of the kings of the tribe of Judah, and today we are going to talk about the reign of his son, Solomon, and the way the chronicler presents that versus the way it's presented in the book of Kings. And I think you'll find that kind of interesting because we've been talking about how the chronicler has some definite purposes for why he tells the story, the way he tells it, what he includes and what he doesn't include. And Solomon's story, I think, is really a good illustration of what the chronicler is doing. So let's go ahead and take a look. I have used that same source I used last time, which I will put in the link below so you can see it again. But the color coding again is my own. But this time I used different colors for a different purpose. I'm looking at the comparison of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, the last part of 1st Chronicles chapter 29, and then 2nd Chronicles through chapter 9, and then 1st Kings chapters 1 through 11, basically. These are the two main places where we read about King Solomon in the Bible. So I thought I would do a comparison of what's included in each one and talk a little bit about the decisions the chronicler made along the way. So the first thing that we want to look at here, I should say, in the green is stuff that's included in both Kings and Chronicles, and I want to point out that the chronicler, when he used stuff from Kings, he basically used it pretty close to the source itself. He didn't make a lot of changes to it, maybe a tweak here and there, but it was largely drawn right from Kings. So we have Solomon's coronation, and God is of course involved in that. So both Kings and Chronicles include that. But now we get to David instructing Solomon, and we don't have this included in both. It's only in Kings and not in Chronicles. And so you're saying to yourself, well, okay, why would the chronicler choose not to include this? Well, I thought that too. I thought that's kind of strange. Well, when I went out and looked at 1 Kings 2, 1 through 9, as it says here, I saw that what David was actually instructing Solomon to do was, there were several people in David's reign that had kind of, in his view, done him wrong. And at the time he acted like he'd forgiven them, but in reality he harbored a grudge. So he wanted Solomon to get rid of these people, take revenge. So that's the instruction that was being given. Well, the chronicler is not going to want to include that. As we said last time, it kind of makes David look bad, and it also puts Solomon right off the bat in kind of a bad light that he's murdering people. So let's just not do that. We'll just skip that. We'll go right on death of David. That's okay. We can include that. It's kind of necessary. You can't have a succession unless the old king dies. So there you go. Well, Solomon establishing his kingdom, we left that out, and guess why we left that out? Because he established his kingdom by bumping off the people that David had asked him to bump off, so we don't want to include that either. The chronicler just passes that on by, as well as marrying Pharaoh's daughter. Solomon does that early on, but it's not really necessary to anything, so the chronicler just skips that. But he comes back in with Solomon at Gibeon, and the reason for that is that at Gibeon, Solomon goes to make sacrifices and worship the Lord. He brings all of Israel with him, and that is definitely something the chronicler would be interested in having as part of his story. Then God gives Solomon wisdom. Well, because it's from God and he's involved with it, of course he's going to want to include that material. But then down here we've got Solomon's wise judgment, and I think most of us remember that story with the two women fighting over the baby, and Solomon wisely says, well, let's cut the baby in half, and the real mother says, no, don't do that. Let the other women have him. Well, then he knows that that's the mother. Well, okay, it's a great story, but it serves no purpose as far as the chronicler is concerned, so he skips that. Well, we have Solomon's prosperity included in both, because it's a gift from God, really. And then the preparations for the temple, which you may recall David did 90% of it before he died. He got the material, and he bought the land, and he just kind of covered all the bases on that. So for Solomon, it was not as hard a job as it might have been. David had done all the prep work. And then the temple is built early on in Solomon's reign. Now, and I wanted to take a pause right there. It's a good time to take a look at Solomon's temple. And this is an artist's rendition of the Temple of Solomon. And it's actually more accurate than some artist renditions are, because you may remember in the Bible, God gave really explicit instructions for the size of everything and the courts and all that stuff that was involved in it. God has already given all of that. So it was built to God's specifications, which also to me means this has high symbolic value. And I know there's probably a lot of good source material on that, what this represents from God's point of view. But let's scroll down here. I have included a different view of it that has all the labels. And I don't know if you can read this on the screen. I'll put the link in the description below of this diagram because I think it's very useful. This is the temple itself, and this is where the holy place is, the Holy of Holies and all that stuff that you remember reading about. But there's also these different courts. And you may recall that the closer you can come to the Holy of Holies, it's almost like you're more privileged or something. The only person who's allowed in the Holy of Holies is the high priest, and that's only once a year. But then you have the court of the Israelites, kind of out here, right near the temple. You can walk pretty close to it, although as you see, there's this nice high wall that guards that. And then out here, though, you have the court of the women. They have their own court. They're not in this inner court, but they're here. And then over here outside is the court of the Gentiles. They have their own court. They are taken into account. There's the court of the priests. There's all the Nazarites, the people who have made vows to serve the Lord. There's all kinds of different places for different levels of folks to be. And this is all very interesting to me. I think one of the things that we can be looking into more would involve how this temple and how it's configured sort of represents what Jesus will do. I know I don't want to get into a whole long thing on that, but this whole idea, you've got the Gentiles, you've got the women, they're all taken into account. But of course we know that when Jesus is crucified, the curtain that separates the Holy of Holies from the rest of the thing is torn in half. So it means access is granted to all. And I think that's something that we have to be thankful for, because this, to me, looks like a very exclusive sort of diagram. And we know that Jesus is not an exclusive person at all. He's quite the opposite. Okay, so we have the temple built, but then when we get to Solomon's palace, no, we don't care about that, because, that's Solomon personally. It's great he has a nice house, but why do we care? We don't. When the ark is brought to the temple, we do care, and certainly when God's glory fills the temple, we care. Solomon blessing the people, we care about that. He consecrates the temple, definitely want to include that. Now this is the one thing that's in Chronicles that is not in Kings, and that is the fire from the Lord consuming the sacrifices. And that might remind you of the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, where he basically challenges the priests of Baal and their sacrifice doesn't have anything happen to it, but when Elijah calls down fire from the Lord for his sacrifice, the fire from the Lord comes down and consumes the sacrifice. And that's kind of reminiscent here, and that may be what the chronicler was thinking of when he put this in. Then we have an awful lot of material that's in both Kings and Chronicles. Solomon and the people offer sacrifices, and there's feasting, and the covenant is confirmed, meaning that God has made a covenant not only with the Davidic line of kings, but with the people, that if they're faithful, God will be faithful to them. And then we have stuff about his territory increasing, his enemies defeated. That again is because God is with him, and it's important that the chronicler include that. Obviously, you would want the religious practices included, and even his economic operations. The Queen of Sheba's visit is included in both, and you remember that she was very impressed with his wisdom, with his wealth, with everything that he had. But this also, of course, she took back with her stories of the God of Israel, and that helped spread the word that there is a true God in Israel. Solomon's wealth is included in both also as a gift from God again. But then all of a sudden we have Solomon's apostasy and his adversaries. No, no, no. We are not going to include that. We don't want to say anything about that. The chronicler does not want to dilute the message that he is portraying here in his writing by telling us that Solomon was less than a model. Because David and Solomon together, it's kind of like, I think of it as kind of the 1-2 punch of the point that the chronicler is making, that this is the pattern for the righteous king. This is what they should be doing. And just as the chronicler left out a lot of material that David was shown to be less than perfect, we certainly are doing the same thing with Solomon. And then at the end we have the death of Solomon in both of them, and that kind of tidies it up. There we go. So this is a quick and dirty, because I'm not going to run over this time, but this is quick and dirty on Solomon. And what the chronicler has done here is set us up, David and Solomon almost taken as one unit, and what is going to happen from here on out with the kings and one queen of Judah, as we will see in future episodes. We only have 2 more Sundays in August, so I have to really get rock and rolling here so I finish up the book, and believe me, I intend to. So you have a blessed day, and I will see you again next week.